I was also very pleased to learn that the Swiss government is co-funding the European Social Survey in Serbia. I can assure you that I think it's a great investment, and I can think of a lot of other things Switzerland shouldn't fund and Swiss taxpayers shouldn't pay. And if they're funding things like that, I think this is a great thing. And also in collaboration with the Serbian government, who contributes, and of course a lot of time and passion and resources that go into these things from researchers in this country. Let me start with a story about Switzerland. So once upon a time, this is the most famous mountain in Switzerland, called Matterhorn. So just to kind of play some cliches here as well. In the end of 1980s and the beginning of 1990s, there was an expert panel, an international expert panel, that was writing a report which was called Revitalizing Swiss Social Science. And they did this to the Swiss Science Council, which is an organization, a commission that consults, that advises the Swiss national government. And what they said is, there is a problem in social science in Switzerland. Social science is basically underdeveloped, and it lacks Europeanization and internationalization. And something has to be done about that. And that was an important report for social science in general, because I was just about to start studying in this time political science at the bachelor's level, and of course I wasn't really aware of these things, but now thinking back, yes, that's how it was. Switzerland, so social scientists in Switzerland, they were mainly focusing on Switzerland. They were not interacting very well, they were not very present, and they were also not publishing in international journals or participating a lot in international conferences. So what happened then is a large program that lasted for 8 years, which was called Zukunft Schweiz, Demain la Suisse, which translated into English is kind of bringing Switzerland into the future. And that was a big funding scheme for about 45 million Swiss francs. That's kind of the equivalent probably of about nowadays, probably 50, 60 million euros. The program was really designed to kind of bring forward social science in Switzerland and put Swiss social science on the kind of the international landscape. And it was very successful in many ways. I think Switzerland is now, and Swiss researchers and Swiss research institutions, they're really contributing a lot and being very present and active at the international and the European level. And I think I'm starting with this because I think it's kind of an encouragement that you have to start somewhere, and that brings you forward. Among the things they did then is that they started to fund systematically survey programs. Some of them are national. They started a Swiss household panel that's still running today. This is a panel where the same people, the respondents in the same households, get questions every year. And we have some of these in this housing panel. We have about 1,500 people. They really responded now 19 years in a row on the questions we were asking them. So think about what you can do if you have a time series and you can follow people over a course of 19 years, and what kind of research question you can ask with this kind of data. Another thing is that they funded the Swiss selection study. This is the project where I've been quite centrally involved in the last 8 years. They also started a summer school in social science methods training. So I think I didn't understand most of it what you said, but some of the things kind of probably you kind of recognize them here as well. Then they said we're going to systematically participate now in all the international European or international social science survey program. One of them was the European Social Survey. Of course, that came kind of during this year's time. There was also the ISSP, the International Social Survey Program, which is a large international program covering roughly 50 to 60 countries. There's the European Value Study, another European comparative project. SHARE is a European project that studies health, aging, retirement in Europe. And then at a later point in time, they also created institutions. This is where I work. I've been working now for the last 10 years, in the last good year as a director of this institution, where they brought actually all these projects together. So we are responsible at FORS, where I work, for actually conducting and running and managing all these big surveys, with the idea that if you bring them together in one institution, you create a lot of synergies. In the field work, you also develop the methodology behind it. And in addition, we have a social science data archive where researchers can deposit data and then can also access data. So quite a success story, but what is important, and I'll come back to that, is you have to think about these things in a long time period. These are not things you build in 1 or 2 years. These are things you build over 10 or 20 years, and you need a long kind of perspective and people actually committing to work on these things and trying to bring them forward, trying to organize funding until you have a relatively stable solution. Why do I think social research is important? I think it's important because most of the problems we are facing today, they are social problems, they are political problems, they are not technical problems. Think about climate change. Okay, there are some people who still don't believe that climate change exists. It's a relatively small minority among scientists, but the big problems regarding climate change is, what can we do about it? How do we convince governments and citizens in these countries to take action, to do something about climate change, to try to reduce global warming? Think about migration, one of the big challenges in European countries and worldwide. Think about poverty, think about unemployment, think about crime, think about populism. We have currently a wave of populism in a lot of countries, most prominently the US. Or think about aging. What we know is that the European population is going to get older, so the people who are above 60 or 65 in the retirement age, that is something that is going to increase. So these are the big things kind of societies are facing these days, and they need kind of responses, they need political responses, but they also need knowledge on what are the consequences of these things, and that are typical kind of questions social scientists ask. If you look at kind of some data, this is data from the Eurobarometer. This is a survey series that is running in European Union countries where people are asked, what is the most important issue facing the European Union today? So what you have on top, actually terrorism has been increasing, migration is on top, economic situation, public finances, unemployment, crime. But these are kind of the big problems that people see the European Union has in the future. And again, that are kind of questions that social scientists can address and research and political scientists can address. You don't need engineers for these things. You don't need chemists for these things. You need people who understand politics and the society and try to increase our knowledge on these things. The European Social Survey has been one of the, actually probably the single most today successful projects in studying social science question in Europe in a collaborative and comparative way. I think you have been, if I understood it, you've probably been talking about this, if I understood some kind of general lines, so I'll kind of go briefly through that. But it has been funded in 2001, the first wave was then running in 2002. It has been on the S3 roadmap The S3 is a planning instrument of the European Commission. So when a project gets on this roadmap, that is recognized as strategically important for the European Union, and then typically also gets secure funding, or in this case helps to convince governments that haven't funded yet a project like the European Social Survey that this is a good thing to fund, because it gets a lot of political recognition as an important project. This then became ERIC. That's just kind of the institutional form on how these big European projects are structured in Europe. It was then named the S3 landmark. That's basically a title again to recognize the importance of a project by the S3 Forum, which is it's the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructures. That's kind of the S3 name here. And it's kind of undoubtedly one of the most prestigious and successful projects in social science in Europe, and it's highly influential. So I'm going to talk then briefly also about why. Well, the background, it's cross-national measures on attitudes basically. It's face-to-face interviews. That's one of the methods standards. If you think about the figures, over 370,000 interviews have been conducted now in these 8 waves that you've been mentioning as well. 38 countries, some of them participated in all of them, some in a few. Data is from round 8, the last round is already available. All the data is also free to use for non-commercial purposes. I think that's also an important contribution that a project like that made, that they set as a standard. Data is something that should be available for researchers at the same time. So even the people who kind of develop modules and questions, and then they get them into these projects, they don't get privileged access to the data. And I think this is a really important standard, because then it allows researchers everywhere in the world, not just in Europe, not just in the member countries, who download the data, use the data, and do their research on them without any restriction. And this ESS has also been important in setting these kind of standards. 110,000 registered users, more than 3,000 academic publications. So this is just amazing. It's just an amazing track record for any projects, but also for social science projects. I'm going to talk now in the next about half an hour about why are these large comparative projects so beneficial. And I'm going to make an argument that there are 3 things that matter. They build a joint research agenda. They set standards and allow for comparison. They connect researchers and research institutions. And then finally, these 3 things together create impact. This is what funders look these days, science funders, also public funders. They think about impact. It's a difficult concept, but that's what we have to be measured against these days as well. Let's talk about the joint research agenda. When you think about all the topics that have been studied in the framework of ESS, you can see it has covered quite a range of all kind of different things. So ranging from citizenship, immigration, work, family well-being, healthcare, economic morality, attitudes to ancient ageism, welfare, trust in justice, climate change, welfare. That's currently in the field. The field is actually over, but that was kind of the topics of round 8. So all kind of important questions you can probably think of. There might be others you can think of, but it really a lot of kind of important questions that were on the political agenda in the last 10, 15 years. They are in these surveys, and you can study these things. Again, just a kind of other kind of graphic presentation. What is also important is that some of the questions have been in all the surveys. So how a lot of these surveys work, not just European Social Survey, they have something which is a core, and then you have modules. And in the core you have kind of standard questions, usually on social demographics, you know, age, gender, professional background. You have questions on politics, media consumption, social trust, these kind of things. And then you have these kind of rotating modules that are then implemented in one, or in some cases in two of the European social survey waves. How is the decision taken on these modules? And I think this is a really other kind of very important mechanism that a lot of projects, not just of the big international European ones, started to implement, but also a lot of the national projects started to implement. Because the big question is, who gets to decide what's getting into these things? The typical way, and I remember some of these things, is like you get some kind of very respected scholars. They come together, sometimes it's just one person, but sometimes they come together and somehow negotiate because they're respected and they've been around for a long time, and then that's kind of the outcome. But my experience, my personal experience is also that this often leads to some suboptimal results because it's not based on a kind of open competition, it's not based on a kind of exchange of ideas, it's not based on a kind of standard evaluation process. So what a lot of these projects started to do is they started to kind of open up the content as well to the scientific community. So everybody who has an idea, a scientific idea, an important research question, can put forward a proposal, participate in this call. There's going to be an evaluation process of some kind, and then if you're successful, then you get your questions in these big surveys for free, actually. Once you get questions in a survey like it, you don't pay for that. You make a contribution with your intellectual ideas. But once this is approved, then you don't have to pay for this anymore. So this allows to kind of develop this content, so the questionnaires in a structured way. It also produces ownership. So if you have a question in somewhere, you know, you kind of still own these questions, even if others can use this as well in their research, but you can you still have your research agenda that has been acknowledged, and then this also often increases the chances that the data is widely used in publications. Think about the Module 9 topics. Justice and fairness in Europe, coping with growing inequalities and heterogeneities. This was a team of researchers from 5 countries: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Israel, USA. Then the other module that was implemented is timing of life. Researchers from UK, Norway, Netherlands, Hungary, Belgium, USA. Again, so typically big teams from different countries coming together, developing these things, and actually for free. You don't get paid for a lot of these things in academia, but they of course, if you then get your questions in, then you have a lot of kind of data that you can use to satisfy your research interests. There is now ongoing a call for Module 2 already, so Module 9 is not even in the field, but the call is open for Module 2 already, and you can all participate. If you have a wonderful idea on what should be researched in, what would that be? Probably 2022 or 21, if you think about kind of the time lab. If you have a wonderful idea, you can participate in these calls. Ideally, you do this with colleagues because that increases your chances, but it's a totally open process and allows people to participate and contribute in these things. So this openness from the very beginning to the end, so that you don't just open the data, but you also open the instrument, I think is really an important principle that shouldn't just be adopted on this international European project. That's something that you should also try to implement at the national level in these projects, and have some kind of basic minimal structure in how you do things also in national, sometimes even local projects. Let me come to the second topic. Standards and comparison. The European Social Survey has been not just influential in setting a comparative research agenda, it has also been quite influential in setting kind of research standards. Before that, how you collect data in a country has been based on kind of local traditions, and there has been quite some variation. Some countries had a lot of reflection on methodological issue, how you get good kind of data, good measurements, and in other countries, these things have not been so developed. And what ESS did, together also with other of these big projects, is they were reflecting on these things. What are kind of minimal standards, what are good standards that should be used to do survey research in a lot of different countries? And how do we make these data comparable? How do we make sure that the measures that are, the data that is collected in one country can be compared to the data that is collected in another country? How do we avoid bias as much as possible? And ESS has relatively restrictive standards compared to other projects, which makes it also quite costly. I think the ESS, from all the studies we do, the European Social Survey is per interview. Some are bigger, but per interview it's by far the highest costs, the highest expenses we have in our kind of different survey programs. So, common questionnaires, there's also a structured translation process, because it has to be translated into national local languages, and how to do that in a way that still allows you to compare the data can be quite complicated if you do that carefully. Some standards on sampling, so they just allow probability samples, they don't allow any kind of quota samplings. They have as a standard that it has to be face-to-face. The reason for that is not so much that face-to-face is necessarily the best and most cost-efficient way of collecting data in every single country. But it's the only way you can still, and it's a standard I would still defend, it's the only way how you can actually really make sure that you get comparable data. And that is one of the reasons why this standard is still in play, despite that face-to-face interviews are by far the most costly way of doing an interview in most countries. They ask for a lot of high response rates, 70%. I actually don't even know how many countries meet the 70%. We in Switzerland, we don't. I think, sorry? No, I think we get to like 50 to 60. That's kind of acceptable, but I think there's a lot of variation on what kind of response rates you get these days in countries. But I'm not sure how many actually really manage this 70%. Things on non-contact, so how many of the kind of target population are you allowed not to contact? On field period and quality checks that you do in face-to-face. This is basically the percentage of people you kind of re-contact after the interview to see if the interview actually has taken place. And then also one of the benefits, so this data collection that needs to be organized. So you need to identify kind of local nodes who are willing and able to organize these data collections and all the different steps that it takes at the local level. So you've seen that. I didn't put the nice flash, I should add this next time to Serbia. But it's going to be very nice to have Serbia on the map here as well for the next round, and hopefully for the rounds to come. Why are these comparative things actually important at all? And I think one of the reasons for that is, I mean, you've probably all done research yourself one way or the other. And then sometimes you get a result. You get something that is like, 20% of the people said this, gave you answer A, and then maybe 30% gave you answer B. And then you look at these results and you ask yourself, yes, and what does this mean now? I mean, it's sometimes really hard, So you have some people being critical, a certain percentage of people being critical towards governments. Is this now a lot, or is this little? Well, very often you don't know just from looking at your own data. So what you need some kind of points how to compare this. And this is the great value of comparative research, that actually it allows you to put your own findings into perspective. You can do this with kind of subgroups within your own data, that's one possibility, but a project like European Social Survey allows you to do. It allows you to compare your findings and what you found in one place with the findings from another place. In some cases also you can do this over time. Is there a change that happened over a certain period of time? So that's why I think, this is an important step from kind of moving also from kind of single cases to descriptive analysis to kind of comparative analysis that has an additional important increase in the value of your findings. Just to give you some kind of ideas, some results from the European Social Survey, it's pretty random because there's so much data, there's no way you could do kind of a comprehensive comparison of these results. This is about happiness. There's one of the questions is in the survey is, how happy are you on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 means that you're extremely unhappy and 10 means that you're extremely happy. And when you look at these things, these are countries. So you can see quite some variation on these things. So the Danes and we Swiss, we're very happy people, according to this survey. But then you have kind of countries like Russia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, where kind of the satisfaction or the happiness that is expressed in these surveys is not so high. So this is a typical case, and then you can start asking yourself, why is this the case? But this is kind of a typical case where, if you would just do this kind of analysis in Switzerland, in one country, you have a result, and then what you do with that? You wouldn't know. You have to know, are people now very happy? Or are they not so happy? Because you can only do that if you can put these findings and these results in perspective. You can then go one kind of step further. So this is from a study that somebody working with ESS data has done. So they looked at what is the correlation between kind of human development index and the average happiness, and they find quite some correlation. The higher human development, the higher the happiness as well. Another example, religion. How many people belong to a religion? It's a typical question in the social demographic. Again, huge variation. You have countries like Israel, Cyprus, Greece, Poland, Portugal, where 80% and more people, they say we are part of a member of a church. While then you have countries like Estonia, Czech Republic, also Sweden, Netherlands, where a lot of people do not belong to a church anymore. So a lot of variation, which then you can study. Justice. Do people feel that courts are pressured by politics? Again, we have some countries here, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Portugal, Spain, Ukraine, where a lot of people think, yes, there is quite a strong influence of politics on the justice system, on courts. But then you have but even here, think about this, 20% of the Swedes, people from Sweden also think that there is a lot of political pressure on their court system. I think that was quite a surprising result in a country where people, probably politicians, thought that their justice system is seen as completely unbiased. Last kind of results, some things to highlight. Immigration attitudes. This is a question that has been in a few times. Do you think that migration makes your country a better place or a worse place to live in? Basically, it's a kind of a measure that looks how accepted is migration. Do people think as migration as something positive or negative? Again, quite some variation. So the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, very positive attitudes towards. So most people, the majority of people there think, yes, migration is in principle beneficial for our countries. And then you have countries like Austria, Portugal, Hungary, Czech Republic, where this is much more critical. Again, interesting variation which you then can put in perspective. What you see here is kind of the same plot, and what you see here is kind of net migration rates. So how many people actually migrated? Mainly it's usually immigration, not immigration. So how many actually people kind of migrated into that? And what we see here basically is no connection. So this shows that these attitudes towards migrants, that is something that is not connected to the actual kind of rate of immigration, but that is something political. Something like that, no way you could do that without comparative research. Let me come to the third thing, which is connecting researchers. After a little sip of water. A project like ESS does this in multiple ways. One of them is that researchers and research institutions, that they are actually also the ones that run these organizations. There's a General Assembly. I happen to represent Switzerland in these General Assemblies. There are other researchers, and sometimes it's actually people from ministries who represent ESS. You have then a directorate, you have a core scientific team, and you have advisory boards, scientific advisory board, methods advisory boards. These are researchers who are there. You have the National Coordinators Forum. I think this is what you were talking about. That brings together the people who actually run the surveys in each countries. You have an exchange on all kind of issues related to ESS. Also a finance committee, and are things that you need. Already the core scientific team has different institutions that participate in that. So it's what we call the distributed infrastructure. It's not a centralized thing, it's a distributed thing. So you have the city, the university, City University in London, where the headquarters is. You have GESIS, it's an institution in Germany. You have the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. You have the Norwegian Center for Research Data. This is where you can get, they make the data available. You have the Netherlands Institute for Social Research. They're heavily involved in methodological question. University Pompeu Fabra in Spain, University of Exeter, University of Ljubljana. So already the core team has quite a lot of people involved. And then you have the users. When you look at these figures, they start from 2005 until 2017, so it's really the latest figures. You have a match, and look at these numbers. So we're talking about more than 100,000 users that are using this survey in some way or another. Registered users currently, so some of them drop out, that was in March 2017, more than 100,000. Downloaders of these 100,000, more than 70,000 actually also downloaded the data. A lot of students use the data, so it's not just used by kind of established academic. If you exclude the students, you still have 37,000 researchers, 25,000 downloaders, and kind of 6,500 users that were active in the last year when this study was this data collection was done. Also, the bibliography, again. 2,700 total publications they were counting. Of those, 1,300 in peer-reviewed journals, more than 100 books that came out on the European Social Survey, and other book chapters, working papers, and so on. Doctoral thesis, 80, a lot of kind of conference papers. It's probably underestimated because, you know, if you try to collect who is using your data in a project, this is really hard because people get the data for free, they download it, and then they usually don't report back that they have done something with this data. So there is probably more out there that has used these data in one way or the other. So From a community building perspective, it is kind of successful, and I think that is an important message also to pass on to you. It's when you start using data like that, you're automatically part of a big community. You have other people who have worked on that. You go to conferences where you have people who have used the same data for similar research questions, maybe for other, but you have already somebody to connect to, you have people to talk to, and you're part of a bigger community. Some of the conferences are organized by European Social Survey itself. They have a biannual conference. I think that we hosted the last one in Switzerland in 2016. There's going to be another one in 2018, where also people come together, have an exchange on their finding and on their research. Last, these projects create impact. I think, in a way, what I've been talking about, kind of defining a joint research agenda, bringing together people, and also setting standards and allowing for comparison, that's already a very big achievement. I kind of hesitate a bit to say that we, as academics, have mainly the roles to shape policies. We are not politicians. Well, some of us are. I'm not. But I don't see my role mainly as shaping policies or kind of influencing governments and parliaments. That's not what I do. That might be a nice side product, but it's not my principal role. But I do think these projects and ESS has the potential to do that, and that was already also the ambitions of one of the founders and one of the key people who brought ESS together and pushed for that. Sir Roger Chowell, he used to be a professor. He died in 2011, but he was one of the co-founders together with other scholars across Europe who were working hard together to get this project going. That usually takes, this is not something you do in 1 year, not in 2 years. Usually it takes you 10 years until you get such a big project running, because it takes a lot of negotiations, Government in the past were often ignorant of their citizens' preferences and needs. Now European governments have a source for counteracting that ignorance. I wouldn't go as far as saying that most politicians care about what we scientists do. I think a lot of politicians are quite fact-free and ignore facts if they get in the way of their policy decisions. But a lot of them are not. I think there is a lot of interest as well, nevertheless, in looking about what research finds out about how are really structures in societies, and take this into account when shaping policies. And this is where we can make an important contribution as researchers as well. Usually this happens, in my personal experience, not so much when you're really in a decision-making phase. Then it's often about kind of bargaining, about power and winning. But in an earlier phase of policy making, this is when there's an openness of considering scientific knowledge and scientific results and getting informed. How do we do that? Well, we make our individual research contributions. We have edited books. That's probably something that is also very advisable to do in a national project if you have people gathering together and sharing knowledge, putting knowledge together in a joint publication, because it also has this idea of building communities. We do conferences, we do panels at conferences. There's a kind of an endless amount of these things going on around ESS as well, and a lot of the other comparative projects. And sometimes we do policy reports, we communicate to the public. I think ESS, also the central headquarters, has put more emphasis in making results understood to a broader audience. I think I just saw that you mentioned multi-level modeling. You can't present a multi-level model to a journalist or politicians. They will think you are just crazy and do strange things. But you can communicate the findings of your results, typically in a way and through channels that can speak to a broader public. There have been some examples where these results from ESS had some kind of impact on policy. I got these slides from the ESS headquarters, and I asked them if they had some showcases, you know, that round 4 immigration led to new legislation in Bulgaria. You had data used in the UK from the Department for Work and Pensions, and so on. So there's a lot of kind of opportunities to present things like findings from a survey like that also to policymakers. And I think that's definitely an opportunity as well in Serbia, because it's probably one of the highest quality data collections that is done in Serbia. And what is kind of interesting, governments, they like to compare where they stand compared to others. That's a very good selling argument. You know, they want to see how is Serbia doing to other countries. So if you can show them how Serbia is doing to other countries, they will listen to you, and this will raise interest. So I think this is an additional advantage and opportunity for projects like this. We don't do that so much in Switzerland because, as I said, our mission, we don't see our mission to shape policies. Our mission is to try to do good research. And if this then somehow translates into policy making, that is fine, but that's not how we see our key and principal missions. But there is a different understanding on the importance of that in other countries, and I know that a lot of funders, these days, they want to have impact. That's what they're looking for. And they have a fairly narrow definition of impact, and which I don't necessarily share, but you have to play the game. So if they want to you want to have some proof of impact, you give them some proof of impact, and you focus at least some of your activities to these things. But I would still kind of argue, be careful. These are kind of scientific research endeavors. They are not policy endeavors. Policy making and influencing policies or informing politicians and governments, this is a byproduct of these things. And also now, since I'm a member in the General Assembly, where there are a lot of kind of people from ministries, I strongly defend this principle. Let's not make this a political survey. This is a scientific survey. It should remain a scientific survey where researchers across Europe address important, relevant scientific questions. And relevant for me always means that it has to have, of course, it has to address some challenges in the society. Then it's relevant. Otherwise, I wouldn't call it necessarily as relevant. But that's the main goal of these surveys, and it's not an instrument for governments or politicians to inform themselves or to help them making good policies. That's their job. Conclusion, almost done with 45 minutes. Well, as you see, I'm a really passionate believer about these large infrastructure projects. I've probably sacrificed a lot of my own publication activities in the last 10 years in trying to build and create big international and national European network and also national network. Because I think bringing together people, trying to define the common research agenda and then implementing this agenda is really extremely beneficial in bringing social science forward all together. And what I've just heard today also, and before when I heard what is going on, you know, this is a success story also already now in Serbia. You know, you have dozens of researchers, probably even more, that come together and they think about, you know, a project. They think about what you can do. They exchange knowledge, not yet because the data is of course not in, but they will. And this is extremely beneficial in shaping a whole discipline for the future. So while it cut on my own publication record, I actually also enjoy doing these things. I like being with researchers, and maybe just to tell you a story, we are trying to build in Europe now a new big projects around what we call monitoring electoral democracy. So it's building around national election studies and adding some things on candidates and parties and so on. So we've been trying to get this forward, which we've just failed now. So we have another chance in about 1.5 years. And so we had a meeting for another big project in Mannheim was about a month ago. And then we said, okay, let's try, a lot of people are working in these areas already there, let's try to have a meeting, an additional meeting. Some people kind of flew in for that, from that are involved. So, but the only time spot we could find to have a meeting together was Sunday morning from 7 to 9 o'clock. So we were wondering, okay, who is coming at this time on a Sunday morning to a meeting where we discuss about kind of political science infrastructure? But we had everybody there who was there, everybody there, and you had a kind of a bunch of academics talking passionately about how can we bring this forward, how can we kind of calibrate, how can we get funding, and I think this is what is really exciting about working in this environment with researchers who are willing to bring this forward. It sets standards. Talked about this. It brings together researchers across country, it creates impact. But maybe the last message I would like to pass on is you have to think about these things in a very long time frame. You know, building important projects, collaborative projects, that's not something you do in 1 year. You don't do this in 10 years. You have to think about a time horizon of 10, 20 years. And you need people who are willing to kind of contribute that. There are setbacks. You sometimes get funding, you don't get funding. The next year you try again. You have people dropping out. You have also sometimes people making your life miserable, methodological challenges to overcome. But it's worthwhile. And if you have this kind of long horizon and time frame, then you will also at some point in time succeed. And what you're doing here with ESS in Serbia, and of course in a lot of other projects you're involved, you're exactly contributing to this kind of mindset and helping to shape social science in Serbia and contributing to social science research in Europe and worldwide in the future. And that's something I would like to thank you for.